I need NOS. I need NOS. Nary, I need it by tonight.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NOS channel. If you're new to North Okanagan Speed, behind me you see my 2021 C8 Corvette Z51 in Elkhart Lake Blue Metallic. This is a 2LT without front end lift and without mag ride, so it's going to be real easy to do our project today. Today we're going to be lowering the car on its factory suspension. It is now 2023. I feel like it's a good time to get this thing dropped to the ground. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, follow along with things that we do to this car, maybe things that we do to the Lambo, who knows. Also, I'd like to welcome a new member to the family. This is Jarvis, our new shop puppy, and if you've watched my other video, that's Peach. So, today, we're going to get this thing slammed to the ground. We've already picked it up, dropped it down so that the suspension is kind of just sitting where it is. It hasn't been compressed a bunch, so that way when we lower the car and we set it back down, we'll get an accurate measurement. The first thing I wanted to do was get a measurement of as it sits right now, and then we can compare before and after to see if we get that 3/4 to an inch of drop that we're wanting. So I took a measurement off the front bumper, off of the front wheel wells, side to side, and the rear wheel wells as well. Do not measure off the mirrors. If you don't know, they're actually different sizes. So the driver's side is not as far out as the passenger side. The passenger side sticks way further out. So I tried to take a measurement from there, and they measure different. So you can't really get an accurate measurement that way unless you compare both of them. You record both ones. So I just went front bumper, front wheel wells, rear wheel wells. The rear wheel wells did match up. They do have the exact same height right now. So the rear wheel wells are 29 inches. The front wheel wells are 27.5. Front bumper is 6 3/4 inches, and the rear bumper to where I measured to is 17 inches. So it's a good idea to get your before measurements, and then we can get an accurate after measurement once we set it back down. So some things you're going to want to make the installation go a little smoother is these beautiful Paragon Performance suspension keys, a tape measure to take your measurements before and after, a spring compressor to help compress the spring, obviously something to write down your measurements on, an impact, got a 19 mil on there to remove these beautiful VR forged wheels that I've already put on, 20s in the front, 21s in the rear, super huge and fat 21-inch rim in the back that houses a 325-inch tire now, so we went a lot wider. It does look a lot better and grips a lot more too. And you can see it's just unbelievably fat underneath there. It's just crazy. So we're gonna get this car up in the air, get these wheels off, remove the front control arm is your first step. And then from there we can compress the springs, pop off the collar, and then lower the key with the keys, lower it down, get it to the lowest setting that we possibly can. Then we'll slam this thing back to the ground and see where we're at. Let's get this thing up in the air. Make sure that these puppies stay out of the way. Don't want to squish anybody. Let's get it up in the air and get to work.
A few moments later.
What we're going to do is we are going to start with the front. Let's get this front beautiful VR forged wheel off of here, and then we can remove the upper control arms and then compress the spring, lower the collar, put everything back together, and move on to the rears. So if you don't know, there's a factory setting in your manual that if you remove these 4 bolts from your upper control arm, and there's a washer on the backside, that sets your camber. For track settings, they suggest that you take that washer and you put it on the head side of the bolt so that it pushes your upper control arm in further. It gives you a bit more camber, and that's the proper setting for track use. I've already done so I've already had these off once. So we're going to go ahead and take these off and then drop all this down. It's going to give us a little bit more room to work with. So now that we got that off of there, you spin it out of the way, try not to hit your body. Gives us a lot more room to potentially get a spring compressor on here. And then there's this plastic collar down here. This has to get popped off. You just use a flat head, you pop that off, that'll expose the threads. Then we loosen the lock with the keys that we got from Paragon Performance. Slide that one all the way down to where there's just 1 or 2 threads showing left. And then we lower the main one that'll actually lower the spring down. With the spring compressor, it's going to help us a lot. We might even be able to just do it by hand. If not, we'll try the keys and just leave the suspension tight. We'll see if we can get this compressor on there. Collar off. That was more challenging than I expected it to be. That was probably the hardest part. I was able to get my spring compressor on there quite scabbily, but it's on there just to take a little bit of the weight off of the keys or off the collars. And then you take your little key and your big key and you kind of spin these off separately. I got it broken free now. So now we're going to lower this bottom one, just thread it out. I can just do it by hand. I didn't even have to use the keys for the whole thing, but we might have to for the upper one that is actually might still have some weight on it from the spring. So get that lowered right down. Want to see a couple of threads left. We're going to do it equally all the way around. Pretty much get it down to its lowest, max lowest setting. So now that we have that down to about there, we'll lower this upper one with the wrenches, the keys, and then start buttoning it all back together. I had to adjust the spring compressor and just end up using a wrench. I had to put it on kind of upside down so I couldn't use the impact. Got it snugged up a bit more, and then I was able to twist off the upper collar a lot easier, but at the same time it wants to spin this whole shock. So you kind of got to grip around here with some channel locks or with your hand for a while, but if it gets tight, use some channel locks or something to stop that from spinning. So now that we've got it down, touching the lock ring again at 1 or 2 threads above where I want to be, now we just take both wrenches again, tighten the bottom one, loosen the top one, snug them together, and she should be good to go. So I'll do that now. It was definitely a little time consuming lowering the collar. The tool kept slipping off over and over again, and then the bottom of the shock kept spinning, so I had to hold on to that with some channel locks, and then from there put the big wrench, this wrench here, put this on, and then make sure it's lined up in the collar and the key, and just slowly work your way at it. It didn't just spin down easily like I was hoping it would, but once it was down, lock those 2 collars back together, bolt in the upper control arm, make sure that the shock is sitting properly in its boot everywhere, and yeah, just tighten everything down and pop that plastic protector piece back up, and that's it. Put the wheel on, the front's done. Let's move on to the rear. Wheel, look how beautiful this wheel and tire package is. It's just so huge, so fat. Just such a beautiful wheel. And for the price, you really can't beat the VR Forged wheels. They are unbeatable in price for a full one-piece aluminum forged wheel. And the ability to put this fatter tire on it like this for more grip is great. So if we ever supercharge this thing or do whatever we want to it, we should have plenty of grip in the back. Not quite as fat as the Z06, but still pretty insanely big. Way bigger than the Lamborghini. Pretty much the same thing on the back. You remove the plastic collar that is along the bottom of the shock there. It's a little tricky. I usually put the screwdriver in sideways and then twist that collar, a little plastic piece, twist it around till it pops down, and then you're going to put your big key on top and your little key on the bottom and break them apart and lower that bottom one until you're 1 or 2 threads above the very bottom thread. That way you just got a little bit of a safety margin. Again, you can use your spring compressor. There's a lot more room in this one. You don't have to remove the control arm. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We will get the collar separated, put that spring compressor on. Hopefully we got a little bit more room to work with back here. And then we'll work on lowering that upper collar until we touch the bottom collar, tighten it back up, put the wheel back on, be done with it. The compressor did not fit, so I had to sacrifice one for the greater good, but I got it up on there now, got it separated, got the lower lock and collar down. Now I'm just working on spinning the upper collar down to meet with it, down at the bottom of those threads there. Again, this here is spinning anytime I try to turn this out. So I have some channel locks on there to help hold that as I use my large wrench to lower that one down. It's as simple as that. And then lock that one back into it. She's done. Got 1.5 threads probably showing on this side. And now you just got to slide this back up and you lock that in place, which it gets a little tricky, especially with one hand. So I'll probably do that off camera. But all in all, it was fairly easy, pretty straightforward, and cheap as chips. Cost nothing. A little time consuming because you're only getting a quarter turn at a time or whatever on with those wrenches on the collar. So it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of a pain in that sense, but relative ease of doing, fairly easy. So you can't have all 3. You can't be cheap, easy, and fast. Fairly fast still though, but 20 minutes a corner realistically. So I'll put this wheel back on, put this collar back on, and I'll go through the other side, and I'll do that off camera, and then we'll come back, lower this thing to the ground, and see how she looks. Alright guys, she's all done. I'm super excited. It looks fantastic. It's finally sitting where I want it to be. It's, doesn't have that huge wheel gap that it used to have. The front end still sits up a little high. It's not nearly as low as the Lambo, which is like 4 3/4 inches off the ground, which is crazy low. But now the C8, the wheel gap is perfect. The front end is still usable, but not too low without having that front end lift. And we dropped it so much that I couldn't even get the arms out for the lift. I had to raise it back up, put some 2x4s underneath it, set it down, pull the lift out, and then drive off the blocks. But it looks fantastic, so let's have a little reveal here. But first, let's go over exactly what needs to be done. So just stay tuned for a sec. What needs to be done, you got to pull the wheels off, obviously. Then if you're doing the front end, you take the upper control arm off, unbolt those 4 bolts with a 15mm socket, swing that out of the way, remove the plastic collar off of the suspension. Once that's off the shock, then you loosen the lower lock nut, spin that all the way down to roughly where you want it to be, and then you grip that shock and you will put your big wrench on there and start loosening the upper collar. To help that a lot, you're going to want to use a spring compression tool. I had to cut one of mine in half to make it real short so that it actually worked. It's more for a truck, so it worked really, really well. But yeah, so once you have that spring compressed and you lower that upper collar all the way down to where you want it to be, tighten up that bottom collar again, put those upper control arms back on, and then put your wheel back on, tighten everything up, make sure it's all good to go. For the rear, you don't have to remove the upper control arm, but it's basically the same thing. Remove the plastic piece off the bottom, use a spring compression tool, loosen the lower lock nut, loosen the lower perch for the suspensions all the way down to where you want it to be, tighten up the lock collar, put the plastic piece back on, put your wheel back on, and enjoy the benefits. All in all, it took me about 20 minutes a corner, and with filming and everything, you know, maybe a couple hours from setup to being completely done. So here it is. Much, much better gap in the wheels. The front end sits much nicer. The rear end also looking good. So for the money, which is nothing, you can't beat it. It's the best pound for pound thing you can do for free to your car if you have a Z51 package suspension without front end lift. If you do have front end lift, there are some other pieces you need to buy to actually make this happen. So realistically, the only thing you got to really spend money on is the Paragon Performance tooling that you need, and they're relatively inexpensive as well. And other than that, you're pretty much good to go. So let's do a little montage. Done, our before and after measurements of the fantastic lowering that we did for free. From the front bumper, we went from 6 3/4 inches to 5 3/4 inches. So we dropped exactly an inch on the front end. So our clearance should still be decent to get over things. We might scrape a little bit, but we'll see what happens. And the front wheel wells, we went from 27.5 to 26.5. So again, dropped an inch. Rear wheel wells went from 29 to 28. And the rear bumper went from 17 to 16. So pretty much exactly all the way around. We're still nice and even. Dropped 1 inch completely all the way around, which is fantastic. And it really sets us up perfect. So we'll see what it does for ride quality, see what it does for drivability. But all in all, can't complain for a couple hours work and for free. So if you liked it, please subscribe, hit that subscribe button, and hit the like button so you can continue to watch and see what else we do to this car or what we do to the Lamborghini. But yeah, stay tuned, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and we'll see you next time.